Hi, Mark. Thanks a million for coming here today to do the podcast with myself and Nick. It's great to see you. And obviously, we've engaged with you on a professional level. So for those of you that don't know Mark, I'm going to allow Mark to introduce himself.
Brilliant. And thanks very much for obviously asking me onto your podcast, Cliona and Nick. Delighted to be here. So just to give people a little bit of my own background. So I'm originally from Coolock in Dublin. I'm the eldest of three children. And my journey, I suppose, in terms of is massively influenced by a young sporting career. So I played football at quite a high level, right up until the age of about 22. So, over a decade, from probably about 10 to the age of 22, massive influence on my life. It really was an obsession. And then it brought me all across the world. So I played here with Shelbourne and Bohemians, but then it also brought me across to Australia. And when I was in Australia, what was quite interesting was what we do in FitVision. So one of my companies is FitVision. It's corporate wellbeing. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't really a thing here in Ireland and the UK back probably 10 years ago. Over there, it was something that was very prominent. I was really involved in the fitness industry into my kind of late teens, into my early 20s. And I kind of knew that at that stage, early 20s, right, am I going to make a career in football at the top level, or do I need to start thinking about potentially other careers that I might do? Mm-hmm. So what was great for me about going to Australia, playing over there, was I got to see an insight into where the fitness industry, where the corporate wellbeing industry was over there. When I returned to Ireland then in about 2012, I'd saved enough money. We opened up a gym in Ballsbridge. But the blueprint, the idea for the business really was around this corporate wellbeing concept, which wasn't really being done here. Mm-hmm. And for me at the time, I'd become really, I suppose, obsessed with the idea of performance and what helps us perform. So yes, the physical aspect is extremely important, but obviously there's the mental aspect of performance as well. And at that time, that's really what corporate wellbeing was. It was trying to help employees both with their physical health and their mental health and well-being. And lucky for me, one of my first clients in my studio was at the time the CEO, and still is today, the CEO of Primark globally, Paul Merchant. Paul is a massive advocate for employee well-being and performance. I spoke to him about this idea of what I'd seen in Australia, really interested. He said, listen, let's have a conversation internally. They backed this idea. They were renovating what's known as Arthur Ryan House there in Parnell Street at the time. They put in a corporate wellbeing studio into that facility. And like anything, people initially, they kind of resist change. Mm-hmm. But within 6 months, those corporate studios, so we had exercise classes on site, we had yoga sessions, etc. Early days, there was a bit of resistance, but within 6 months, those classes were packing out. And I suppose if you look at then over the next couple of years, we took on more clients. So we work now with the likes of Oracle, Irish Life. We work with Workhuman, Indeed. A lot of these organizations would have in-house gyms, and they use them essentially to help promote the employee well-being. So there's a number of initiatives outside of that. The business, however, has progressed in the last decade, not so much just focusing on the physical and the mental, but also in the areas of leadership development and organizational performance. And that in a way has really moved with my own academic background. So I've completed a master's in mental health and mental skills and organizational behavior. And what was quite interesting was during the period of COVID, I got the opportunity to work globally with an organization, HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Mm-hmm. And we delivered a performance-based program for their managers. So I got the opportunity to work with over 3,000 managers across the space of about 6 months to 12 months. And to be honest, what's happened in the last probably 2 to 3 years is that service that we offered at that time, which was quite nuanced. Now what we're seeing is that there are more and more organizations inquiring and wanting to do more of that specific work for their managers. And most recently, in the last 2 years, that's essentially led to the birth of a new brand, which is called Leaders Connect. So FitVision focuses mainly on the corporate wellbeing aspect. Leaders Connect focuses more on the organisational and the leadership development aspect.
And so you started off, obviously, as a professional footballer, setting up your own business. Did you have any background in business, or did it just evolve? Because obviously starting a business is a very challenging thing to do. And, you've built that obviously over the last 10 years. You've 10 employees, I think, is it? So, that's a whole other, it's a whole other thing to do. So how did you grow and develop that and scale the business is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think, and for anybody maybe listening in who has that idea in their head that they want to start a business and they're just thinking, oh, I could never do it, or I don't believe you'll ever feel I can 100% do this, right? Because a lot of the challenges that you're going to encounter, you don't know about them yet. Where I was quite lucky was, as I was working as a personal trainer 10 years ago, a lot of my clients were business owners. So in a way, as much as I had started this business, I maybe didn't think, okay, how am I going to scale this to work with organizations globally? Initially, it was very much focused on what's the goal? What's the goal for the next week, the next month, maybe the next year? And that was to get this corporate well-being idea into various organizations, and it was to fill the studio. So, very much what is the basic goal that is achievable, that is, let's call it the SMART principle for our goal setting, which we all know.
Yeah.
Zone in on that and try to achieve that. But what was great for me at the time was a lot of these entrepreneurs that I was working with, they were coming in, following a stressful day, and they'd be telling me a little bit about, okay, this happened today and that happened today. And I got to then ask them, how would you deal with this scenario? How would you deal with that scenario? So it's not something that just, I believe, overnight you think, I've got the tools to be able to do this. I do believe that it is a skill. And over time, you start to understand, which again, I'm sure you guys are over 10 years doing it yourselves. You start to see scenarios happen again and again. And you might have looked back the first time you encountered that challenge or scenario and think, oh God, I should have dealt with that better. But the chance is you're going to get an opportunity to do that again and again. So I do think this skill evolves over time, and you get more and more confident in dealing with those specific situations. Whereas I think a lot of people, they just think, oh, look at all of those things that you'd have to manage if you were a business owner, and I wouldn't know the first thing about them. What I would say to everyone is, go down to the kind of the most common aspect of what you need to know, zone in on that, and try to start getting good at that, because the other skills will naturally just evolve in time as you continue to grow and put emphasis on those.
I have to say, Mark, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Alpha Wealth's situation is not too dissimilar to yours. Like, we're just over 10 years in business. We have 10 employees. We've just about got our 11th who joined us today, actually. Yes. And for me, there was a little bit of a sliding doors moment. I worked in that sort of corporate background for a while, and I found at the time I just got to the end of this kind of, it was almost like a T-junction. You just stay in, or do you make that transition? And it was a moment where a fellow employee had decided that he was going to leave a slightly different part of the business. He was an accountant, and it was almost a case of we moved into this sort of shared office together. And that was the kind of the catalyst that sort of essentially started. And then there were certain moments in time, but like that, there's been certain things happen. It sounds to me that maybe that one meeting with Paul may have been that for you. And maybe it was going to happen regardless, but, there was certain parts of Alpha. I remember we moved to a little island in Cork, and there was one person in Little Island said that, if you were down here, I would engage with you. And strangely, even though it was like completely like irrelevant in the scheme of everything else, it was probably the one reason that, it kind of caused us to move into that particular location. And then everything else just kind of happened then thereafter,
And I, obviously, listening into lots of your podcasts as well on Lead Well, but, you've obviously engaged with big companies like the likes, obviously, you've said of Indeed and Oracle and Hewlett Packard. People will say, oh my God, Mark, you've made it. Do you feel like you've made it? Or, are there still a lot of challenges that you face, every day in terms of the business?
Listen, absolutely. There's tons of challenges, as anybody knows, in terms of if you're a business owner, if you're a manager. change is inevitable, and obviously the society we live in today moves so fast that you're going to get obviously these curveballs thrown at you nearly on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I think what was interesting there was this idea of, have you made it, I think is a really interesting question, because when I've interviewed a lot of business owners, I will ask them the question, and when I coach business owners and leaders, I'll ask them the question, what is success for you like? And sometimes you may get the eye roll, right? What's success for me? But it's so surprising how many people don't really understand that. And when I say success, I mean, if you look at you personally, for you as an individual, aspects like your health, are you able to manage your health well? Are you able to get your exercise in, etc.? Family, do you get to spend the time that you want with family and quality time to work on those relationships? And then I think as well, from a business perspective, are the goals of the business really aligned to you and your values and the type of life that you want to live? Because I'll just give you a small example. One of the individuals that I would have coached, very successful business, and one day I asked him, what's the goal for the business next year? And he said, double the revenue. I said, right, interesting. I said, tell me a bit more about that. Why is it double the revenue? Like it's an obvious answer, double the revenue. But why is that important for you? And it was nearly like a light bulb, like, actually, I have no idea why that's important. It's a figure, it's something I can strive towards, but I actually have no idea as to why that's important for me. Right, so unpack that a little bit more for me. And we ended up having a completely different conversation. His realization at the end was actually the business is performing really well. It fits really well with the life I'm living at the moment. I get to spend quality time with the people that really matter to me. I get to do my training and manage my own personal health. So the goal shifted within a 20-minute conversation. So when I hear the question around, have you made it?
Yeah.
I think my answer to that question is always, have I got time to look after myself? Have I got time to spend with the people that matter the most to me? And do I feel that my company is having an impact on the people that we work with? And then the people within that company, are they getting to progress as individuals as well? For me, not that you'd ever feel and say, I've made it. But if those boxes are ticked for me, I have to give myself credit to say, okay, we're actually doing a good job. And by the way, that's not something that's come easy. This idea of giving yourself some credit, giving yourself that pat on the back, because notoriously we all have those quite loud inner critics, let's say. But for me, that's my kind of measuring stick, those different areas.
And I think Nick always talks about this. It's like you refer to it as the balls in the air, and how can I keep all those important balls in the air, or the different buckets.
Yeah. And I always say to Cliona that I struggle at times that there could be, and these, I label them as, for example, you speak about, do you get time to work out or do what you want to do? It doesn't have to be physical, but just what do you enjoy? Yeah. Do you get to spend time with family? Is the business running well? And, are you getting enough of your friends' time? I call it sort of the, social time. Yeah. And I always struggle to get all the balls up at the same time. I say to Cliona that if one ball's up, another will be down. And there's been these occasional moments where I say, oh yeah, everything seems to be going well, and it only lasts for a very short period, Yeah. So that for me would be probably, the same.
And I actually think, Nick, it's good to accept that as an individual and say, I cannot keep all these balls up all the time. So knowing that every now and again, something is going to drop, or you're going to need to maybe, reflect back in and say, I need to give that area more time. Because what we don't want people to hear when we say this, right? Mm-hmm. And this came up in a session recently with a group of individual leaders. We were talking exactly like that. And one individual put up their hand and they said, like, how am I supposed to keep all those balls up in the air? Like, that's just impossible. So the focus was, how do I get all of these things that you've just mentioned? Because at the moment, they're all over the place, right?
And I think a lot of people struggle with it.
Absolutely. So it's about remembering that, okay, we've got, as silly as this may sound, right? On a daily basis, there's only a certain amount of hours that we have. So have you got a bit of an intention around, okay, what are the behaviors that I want to do today, the actions that I want to take, and how will they influence or contribute positively to these areas? Mm-hmm. And it's starting there. It's starting with, right, what can I actually do today, rather than thinking of all of the things that I have to do or I should do, or what's maybe the one thing that you could do in a specific area today that would be beneficial. And I think the thing we struggle with as business owners, as managers, is that obviously work consumes such a big part of our life that we can often say, here's the 25 things I want to do for work today. And if I get them done, well, then I might do the one or two things. I might spend that little bit of time, with that friend, or I might go and do that exercise session. But as we know over time, if that's the focus, well, then we start to look at work as something that's a real drain on us. We start to forget the reason as to why we really like it and enjoy it. So by having that holistic view and zoning in on maybe daily behaviors in each area, even though you'd love to spend more time on your work, long term, that strategy is going to be obviously far more beneficial for us as individuals.
And we're at the, I suppose, time of the year where we are planning for next year and looking at the goals for next year and, the targets. So, based on the previous conversation, should the goal and the target be something other than numerical and, figures? Because obviously Beyond Money is the podcast.
Yes.
So, we're talking obviously about finance and money, but should we be looking at more holistic goals?
Yeah, I think so. When we consider setting goals and the process of setting goals, for me, the process really starts with, okay, what is it for me that, in terms of success? Yes, it sounds great to be able to say I want to double my revenue, but what else goes along with that? So, for example, in my case, if I said I want to double my revenue for my business, that also goes along with having to hire X amount more people, which means, obviously, as we know, in certain cases, you've got X amount more face-to-face time, X amount more salaries, etc. So I think when we consider the process of setting goals, it's not just flippantly throwing something out there because it might look good in, out there in society, right? And it's what maybe society drives us towards. It's about really connecting with, why is this goal important for me?
Yeah.
And then trying to unpack the different components. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it being numerical.
Because I know, Nick, you're a numbers man and you have a figure in your head that you want to achieve. But I suppose it's about looking beyond that as well.
So you're right, Clean. I think it's fine to have, and we need to have something that's measurable, of course. But then it's not forgetting the second part to that, which is those elements of, I suppose, really unpacking that in terms of what does it mean for the rest of the business, all the different variables. Why is it important for me as an individual? How might it change my day to day? So you're really doing that, let's call it that pre-mortem in a way. You're starting to think, okay, if we achieve this goal, what else goes along with this goal?
I think one of the things I find as well, Mark, this, interestingly, I obviously speak to a lot of business owners as well, like yourself, and I talk to them about themselves as individuals, because a lot of business owners believe that they are the business, even if they have a number of employees. And people often say to me about Alpha Wealth, you're doing really well. But then we have to look at our own personal situation, like, do we have personal wealth, or is it all just the company? Because that's the dichotomy of saying, okay, well, I talk to business owners a lot about how can they extract that wealth into their own names, because ultimately that's the idea for all of us, surely. And then you talk about this kind of financial independence, and there's been a lot of focus of late, interest in this whole concept of FI, financial independent, retire early.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what is your number? What does it take for like Mark O'Reilly to take the decision that he can pull back a bit, or he might decide to change career? And, Cleaner often says to me, I don't believe you in that when you do maybe get to that point. And I say to everyone, like, I'm 51 today, 60 is my exit point. I've kind of set that as my goal. And I always say to people, you have to be agile, you have to adapt to your situation, and obviously we all go through a lot of different changes through our lives. But I am quite keen on sticking to that. Whereas my father, who I get a lot of traits from, some good, some bad, he was very different. I mean, he worked till he was 90, became successful in the property game in London. And yet if you looked at him, you'd swear he didn't have 2 pence, as it would be in England, to rub together, So I think we all have our different kind of traits and facets. But the key thing is, I suppose, again, sometimes it's about differentiating the personal from the business. And I say to people, like, when I see them, the business owners, there are 2 hats that I see. There's your personal hat and your business hat. And it's quite difficult at times. I find it difficult even though I give the advice,
Yes.
to actually sometimes differentiate.
And I think, Nick, like what you're talking about there, this idea of having a number of when you want to retire and how much money I might want to have in my pension, I think that's really important, because then you're starting to visualize, okay, what do I want to do then for maybe, if I'm lucky, for the next 20 years of my life? I think the only danger with that for some people that I've encountered on the podcast, through my research, through people that I've worked with one-to-one, is that some become so fixated on that, let's call it the business or creating or generating a certain amount of wealth, that they don't see the value in, for example, their personal health. Oh, I'll start exercising when I'm 60.
Mm-hmm.
Or, do you know what? I'll start spending that time with my kids when I'm 60, when I have more time. But I think that's a very dangerous game for some people to play, because it's about, and again, it's not taking the focus off this, but it's just remembering that this isn't absolutely everything, that you have key areas of your life that give you fulfillment and that will give you joy. And the more that you put into them, the more motivated you'll be in the other key areas. Like, as we know, Nick, you got to the gym this morning, I know, right?
Yeah.
But that investment in you going to the gym, like, there's no doubt that throughout today, you're going to have more energy, you'll be more motivated, right? Because that's how our brains work, our bodies work. But it's incredible how many people, they can completely just become focused in on one facet, and then they become blind to the others, not realizing that it is a dangerous game. It's a very short-term mindset. So I do think having goals in all those areas can be extremely beneficial.
It's like
for
beyond
us.
wealth, beyond health. It's,
Exactly.
it's,
Yes.
It's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
It really is.
And can I ask you, Mark, in talking to business owners as you do, and obviously even some senior managers, we all set goals and we all set targets. And even for myself in Alpha Wealth, I keep challenging the guys, and it's not resting on your laurels and like, we've had a great year. It's about moving forward. And that can become frustrating at times for many of them, including Cleaner. But then I try and improve myself. I start listening to more podcasts like your own, obviously. Then there's the likes of these very influential, successful people like Gary Vee, Ryan Serhant's another one that I've been following recently. Some people might know him from these sort of property programs. And it comes with a tinge of frustration, disappointment sometimes, because they're probably in that exceptional 5%, extremely driven, very successful, and even some of our competitor businesses, obviously, if you look at Alpha Wealth, we're striving to be better. We want to have a great client engagement. We want to improve. We want to dominate nationally, not quite, but that's, and then I feel at times that even pinning yourselves to some of these very successful businesses, you would never really compete. They're much bigger, they're more established, they're more national. But I think I say to Cleaner that you can hang on to their shirt tails, and you can become more successful. We talk about sports. Yeah. I played a bit of soccer, but I did running for a short period. I was never really going to be a runner, but I just got into it. I remember buying those, running shoes with the spikes. And the best race I ever ran is that I picked like the guy that was favorite, and I just tried to stick with him. And it's funny. It's a really weird analogy, but it kind of stuck with me on other things. Like, you don't have to be the best. You just have to try and align yourself to all the best.
So on that, and obviously this is a question that I have for Mark, is the mentorship side of things. And in kind of growing a business and scaling a business, how important is it to have a mentor? And I know you've spoken about this with a lot of business owners on your own podcast. So it's something that I'm just interested in personally.
Yeah. And I think, just to go back to what Nick said there a second ago, because it feeds into this as well, I think having an organization or a company or an individual that you look at and you say, for me, that's what good looks like. I want to try and strive towards that person. I think it's important that you don't measure your success off that person, but I think it's good to have somebody that you say, okay, they seem to be the gold standard in my industry, or that company is the gold standard in my industry. Let's try to act and perform and behave like that person or like that organization. that role modeling aspect is really important for us, even in terms of our own self-confidence as we continue to grow. But as you said there, Cliona, having a mentor, extremely important. I did a little bit of research in the last 2 years with CEOs, and I looked essentially at, it was all around leadership behaviors and also their mental health and well-being. And one of the aspects that came up time and time again that allowed them to perform in their roles and manage their mental health and well-being was having a mentor. Now, what was really interesting, and I would certainly align with this, was I think if you have a mentor early on in your business, be open to the fact that that mentor may not be the right mentor 5 years, 10 years down the line. And what I mean by that is I had a mentor really early on in my career, and he was excellent for me in those early years because the business, it was all about growth. But what I found over time was that mentor started to kind of care more about what he felt was right for the business, my business, versus what was right for me. So I think as you're seeking a mentor, I think it's important that that mentor wants to understand you first and what you want to achieve with your business, and then offers advice through that lens versus, okay, if I was in your shoes, this is what I would do. So it's really important that when you seek that mentor, that they have your best interests at heart. They understand what success looks like for you. And then they advise you based on that lens, not on, well, if I was in your shoes, this is what I would do instead of what you're doing right now, without asking the question.
It's really interesting, Mark. Sorry to interrupt you, but, again, I heard you speak on, one or two of your podcasts where, you can get very bad advice and it can be quite damaging. And yet, as business owners, we probably will seek this nuggets of wisdom. And for me personally, when we started Alpha Wealth, there was a mentor offered to me, and I actually shied away from that, because I felt that they probably weren't quite aligned to what we wanted to try and do. And there was a bit of a roll your own boat mentality, if truth be told, like someone else telling you what to do. And, and they were quite a bit older than me. And I just felt that they weren't quite, and maybe it would have been the best thing, who knows. But now, interestingly, 10 years later, we're looking at this scaling and next level. And that for me is where I think could be, important, because I think for certain business owners, you generally start, and it's funny again, I'm trying to take as much as I can from listening to people like yourself. This whole thing about most business owners are typically grafters, as it's described. And that's what I mean by that is that, you're not in that sort of 5% of, the absolute, just, what is it, blue turns to, red, and it's just disconnectivity. And I definitely put myself in that category. Like, the one thing you can do is you can just work hard and just hope that it's enough, really.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier about, your time, and thinking about your time is almost like this money equivalent. And it's a bit of I find at times that if I was to say to somebody, my hours are worth 250 euros an hour, like, it sounds a little bit like I'm precious. But you have to have that sort of like almost like honed in, is what I'm doing for the next hour the most important thing that I could be doing for the next hour? And you try and follow those traits, and it's a whole kind of...
I'm always amazed, Nick, when I would step into a room with leaders who are, quite senior in organizations and obviously have a massive amount of demands on them. And then you do something as kind of basic as looking at where we're spending our time, how we prioritize, how we make an intention for the day. And what you see is, and this isn't, again, I'm a victim of this myself as well. It's so easy to be caught up in, okay, let's just get to Friday and then let's take a breath on Friday. And what happens, unfortunately, is then that short-term mindset, and this is very typical for a grafter, right? We just get stuck in Monday to Friday and we just keep doing that. And before we know it, a year has passed or 2 years have passed. We might do the yearly check-in on the goals, but the reality is we are not, life is not, we're not in control. Life is happening to us and we're responding day in, day out. And I think the ability to be able to pull ourselves out of that a little bit and really reflect regularly, have an intention for each day that ties into the other goals that you have in your life is so important, because in today's society, as we know, there's always something else to do. There's the next task.
Okay.
And we do operate in this kind of chronic stress environment, which is dangerous for us from a decision-making and a thinking perspective. Because when we are fueled by that cortisol and that adrenaline, we will generally tend, yes, sometimes it's good. We need that bit of adrenaline to get things done. But if we don't have that ability to pull ourselves out, what we find ourselves doing is starting to make bad decisions or doing certain behaviors that we look back on and we think, why would I do that? Like an example might be, we might end up, treating a colleague in a way that we would never normally do that. We would never normally stand for that. But because I'm so far in this, I fall victim to.
And sometimes reactions are because of something else that's happening in your life.
Yes.
There was one question, and probably finish on this question, because we've delved into so much, in this. And I suppose one thing that has become apparent is that a business and running a business is a lot more than beyond money. It's your well-being, which is a huge, huge part of being able to kind of function well. So I suppose just to wrap it up, Mark, what advice would you give to any business owners that are, obviously managing their business, managing their finances? What is that kind of key nugget of advice that you may give and impart to any business owners?
I think we've mentioned that, as in a large part today, is really understanding what does success look like for you in your business, in your own personal life, with the key relationships, the key family members maybe, and let that be that North Star for you to dictate your daily behaviours. Now, it goes without saying that some days you will perform better than others. And I think in particular, business owners find it hard to get their head around that because we attach so much of our identity to our business. So if I have a good day with my business, I feel amazing. If I have a difficult day, it obviously hits me maybe more than it would someone who doesn't own the business. I got a great bit of advice quite early on, was all around the ability to modularize the highs and the lows. So when you win that contract, being able to say, great, we're a step closer to these clear goals that I have now. But also if you lose a contract, understanding that it's not necessarily a reflection on you as an individual. It's another potential learning. So you can obviously dissect it, do your after action review, try and take away some of those key learnings. So for me, modularizing those highs and lows, being clear on what success looks like, they're probably the two pieces of key advice I could give to any business owner. And that's what's really come back at me when I've asked similar questions in my podcasts. Be clear on what success looks like, but don't get carried away as you move through the journey, because some days are going to be great, some days are going to be tough. And the only way you'll survive in this kind of business ownership is if you get that skill, you build that skill of being able to know and understand that, and detach your personal identity from just your business, because you're also potentially a mother or a father, you're a friend, etc. You wear all these different hats. So you should lean into all those hats in terms of, for aspects like your own personal self-esteem, not just your business.
And I think it's even goes beyond kind of business owners. It's to anybody working for any corporate, because I came from the corporate world and sometimes it becomes your identity.
Yeah.
So it's, it's
You're right. These are universal, Cliona. I know I referenced it and framed it in a business owner, but we all, can, I suppose, struggle with that identity piece with the work that we do, and we have a bad day and all of a sudden, as a result, I negatively criticize myself. That inner critic speaks up. So I think it is universal, a lot of these things that we've spoken about on this podcast today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark, and those really, really great insights. It's been really lovely chatting to you.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.